my parents threw away every photo of me and my dead brother, then handed me emancipation papers 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. When I asked why, my mom screamed, "Why couldn't it have been you in that car?" I stayed silent. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, she opened a letter, went completely still, and hasn't eaten since. I was just trying to find the stupid Christmas decorations in our garage when my whole world flipped upside down. I found our photos in garbage bags. Every picture that had me and my brother together was literally thrown away like trash. 3 years since the accident, and my parents weren't just grieving. They were systematically erasing my existence from this family. My brother Mark died in a car accident when he was 17. I was supposed to be with him that night, but I had the flu and stayed home puking my guts out. Lucky me, right? Except luck doesn't feel so lucky when your parents look at you every day like you stole their real child's chance at life. Mark was everything. Football captain, honor roll, the whole golden child package. Me? I'm just the weird quiet kid who draws too much and has panic attacks. Oh, and get this. My parents are literally mental health professionals. Mom's a therapist and dad runs grief support groups. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so screwed up. They won't pay for my therapy, so I work at a bookstore after school just to afford sessions every other week. Last year, they had their miracle baby through IVF, fresh start baby for their fresh start life without reminders of the dead son or the daughter who should have been in that car. Then later, I heard mom on the phone with my aunt saying, "It's so much easier now that we only have one child to worry about. It's like we can finally breathe again." One child. Baby Ethan. Not me. I'd already been erased in their minds. That night at dinner, I finally snapped. Asked mom straight up why our photos were in the garbage. She started bawling immediately, going, "I can't look at them anymore. You have his eyes." Dad slammed the table so hard the dishes jumped. Why do you always have to upset your mother? 2 weeks later came the family meeting. The dining room table was covered in legal documents. Mom had this fake smile plastered on. "You're so mature, sweetie, working and paying for your own therapy. We think it's time to make it official." Emancipation papers. They were literally kicking me out, but framing it like they were doing me a favor. Dad goes, "You'll have more freedom for college prep. Aunt Kara offered to help while you figure things out." I saw his will sitting right there when he went to grab a pen. Everything to baby Ethan. 3 years after losing Mark, and I'd been written out completely. I signed the papers with shaking hands. Before I left, mom handed me Mark's old backpack. "You should have this. I can't look at it anymore." Inside was a birthday card for my 14th birthday. He died 2 weeks before he could give it to me. My parents found it in his sock drawer and kept it hidden for 3 years. It read, "To my favorite person in the world, can't wait to watch you grow up. Love, your big brother." I ugly cried for hours that night. They had me move out later that week. They wanted me gone before Ethan's first birthday party because I was too much of a complication. When I got to Aunt Kara's, she was completely confused. I thought this was just a weekend visit to talk about colleges. I showed her the papers and watched her face go from confused to furious. That manipulative bastard. He pulled this same crap when our dad died. She immediately called her friend Claire, who's a social worker. Claire took one look at everything and said, "This is textbook abandonment disguised as independence. They've been planning this." Aunt Kara turned her spare room into my room that same day. No questions asked, just, "This is your home now." The truth started spilling out like a broken dam. My parents had been telling everyone I was troubled and acting out since Mark died, that I wanted emancipation to find myself. They'd been crafting this lie for months. I kept reading Mark's card over and over. Such pure love from my big brother while our parents couldn't stand to look at me. When I went back for my things, I found their book draft about grief and healing. 400 pages. I'm mentioned twice. Their social media had already erased me. Every recent photo was their perfect new family of 3. I started documenting everything with Claire's help. My therapist helped me write a letter to extended family. My boss offered me full-time hours when she found out my situation. Extended family started calling after my letter. Even grandma got suspicious. Why wasn't Lily at Christmas? Family started refusing to attend Ethan's party without me. My parents panicked. Their stories kept changing and contradicting. Then they showed up at Aunt Kara's demanding I back them up. Aunt Kara blocked the door. "You're not getting near her." That's when mom finally showed her true face. "Why couldn't it have been you in that car?" She screamed it right at me. The neighbors heard everything. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls from mom, but dad's single text made my blood freeze. "We know what you told them. Come home now or we'll make sure everyone knows the truth about the accident." The threat hung in the air like poison. My hands shook as I stared at dad's text. What truth about the accident? There was no secret. I had the flu. I stayed home. Mark went to the party alone and never came back. Aunt Kara found me sitting on her porch steps 20 minutes later, still clutching my phone. She took one look at my face and sat down beside me. "Show me." I handed her the phone. Her jaw tightened as she read. That manipulative piece of, she caught herself. "Pack a bag. We're going to see grandma." The drive to grandma's took 2 hours. Aunt Kara made 3 phone calls on the way, each one angrier than the last. I caught fragments, threatening a minor, and documented abandonment, and won't get away with this. Grandma's house smelled like cinnamon rolls and safety. She took one look at us on her doorstep and pulled me into the tightest hug. "I've been waiting for you to come to me." We sat at her kitchen table while Aunt Kara explained everything. Grandma's face grew harder with each detail. When we got to dad's threat, she stood up and walked to her office. She came back with a thick manila folder. "I've been keeping track since Mark's funeral," she said, opening it. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, photos. "Your father has always been a manipulator. I watched him do it to your grandfather. I wasn't going to let him do it to you." The first document made my stomach drop. An email from mom to her sister from 2 years ago. "We're considering our options with Lily. She's becoming too difficult. The constant reminder is destroying our marriage." 2 years ago. They'd been planning to get rid of me for 2 years. Grandma flipped to another page. Bank statements showing they'd been moving money into accounts only in their names. College funds that should have been split between Mark and me, all redirected. "But this," Grandma said, pulling out a final document. "This is what made me take action." It was a social media post Dad made to a private grief support group. "Our daughter has been spreading lies about the night our son died. She's claiming she was sick, but we know she convinced him to go alone because she didn't want to deal with his friends. The guilt is eating her alive and she's lashing out at us." The timestamp was from last week, before they kicked me out, before any of this exploded. "They're telling people I called him," I whispered. "They're telling people a lot of things," Grandma said grimly, "but I've been telling people the truth." My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Samantha. "Just heard what your parents are saying at Ethan's party prep, that you were hammered and convinced Mark to stay home so you wouldn't get caught." What the hell? Hammered? I was 14. I had the flu. Mom gave me medicine Ethan and checked my temperature every 2 hours that night. More texts flooded in. Cousins, aunts, uncles. The story was spreading like wildfire, each version worse than the last. I made Mark go alone. I was supposed to be the designated driver. I had been drinking at home. They're at Ethan's party prep right now, I said, showing Grandma the messages. She stood up. Good, then we know where to find them. The community center was decorated with balloons and streamers. Cars filled the parking lot. Extended family had come from 3 states for Ethan's first birthday. Inside, I could hear Mom's laugh, bright and fake. We walked in together. Grandma in the middle, Aunt Kara and me flanking her. The room went silent. Mom's face went white. Dad stepped forward. Mother, this isn't the time. Sit down, Robert, Grandma commanded. The voice that had raised 4 children and buried a husband brooked no argument. She walked to the center of the room. Extended family watched with a mixture of confusion and anticipation. I've been listening to the stories being spread about my granddaughter, Grandma began. About the night my grandson died. I think it's time everyone heard the truth. Mom started crying. Dad tried to interrupt. Grandma silenced them both with a look. Lily had the flu that night. I know because I was on the phone with her mother at 8 p.m. She looked directly at Mom. You told me her fever had spiked to 103 and you were debating taking her to urgent care. The room shifted. People started murmuring. I have the phone records, Grandma continued. I have the urgent care discharge papers from the next morning when her fever wouldn't break. I have the prescription receipts. I have everything. She pulled out her phone and started reading. Text messages from that night. Mom updating the family about my fever. Photos of me passed out on the couch, clearly sick. The urgent care bracelet with the date stamp. So I want to know, Grandma's voice rose, why my son and daughter-in-law are telling people their 14-year-old daughter was hammered. Why they're saying she convinced her brother to go alone. Why they're blaming a child for a tragic accident that had nothing to do with her. The silence was deafening. Uncle Christopher stood up. We were told she's been troubled since the accident, acting out, that she wanted to be emancipated. They abandoned her, Aunt Kara said flatly. They threw away every photo of her and Mark together. They wrote her out of the will. They kicked her out 2 weeks before she turned 18 because they didn't want her at this party. That's not, Dad started. I have the papers, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. The Emancipation papers you made me sign. The ones where you said it was for my benefit. The will I saw on the table. The book draft where I'm mentioned twice in 400 pages about grief and healing. Cousin Fair's mom gasped. You wrote a book about grief and didn't include your living daughter? She's troubled, Mom said weakly. She needed space to heal. She needed parents, Grandma snapped. She needed support. She needed therapy, which you refused to pay for despite both being mental health professionals. We offered, Dad tried again. You offered nothing, I said, finding my voice. I work 30 hours a week to pay for therapy. You haven't bought me groceries in a year. You had a baby to replace both of us, and when that wasn't enough, you decided to erase me completely. Don't be dramatic, Mom said. I pulled out Mark's birthday card. My hands shook as I read it out loud. To my favorite person in the world. Can't wait to watch you grow up. Love your big brother. My voice cracked. You kept this from me for 3 years. You hid the last thing my brother ever wrote to me because you couldn't stand the thought that he loved me. Aunt Claire, who had been documenting everything, stepped forward. I've been helping Lily navigate the situation professionally. What I've observed constitutes emotional abuse and abandonment. The fact that you're now spreading defamatory lies about her role in Mark's death is beyond reprehensible. The room erupted. Family members started arguing. Some defended my parents. Others expressed shock. Baby Ethan started crying in his high chair. Through it all, Grandma stood like a rock. When the noise died down, she spoke again. I've made some decisions. Robert and Patricia, you've shown me who you are. How you treat your daughter shows me how you'll treat Ethan when he doesn't live up to your expectations. She pulled out an envelope. I've changed my will. You are both excluded entirely. Lily will receive her fair share, as will Ethan, but through a trust managed by Kara. You won't touch a penny. Mom burst into tears. Real ones this time. Dad's face turned purple. You can't do this, he sputtered. I can, and I have, Grandma said calmly. My lawyer has already filed the changes. I've also instructed him to monitor any attempts at defamation against Lily. If these lies continue, we will pursue legal action. She turned to the rest of the family. Anyone who chooses to believe their lies over documented evidence is welcome to leave. This party is now a celebration of truth and a welcome home for my granddaughter. The room divided. Some relatives stormed out with my parents. Others, including Samantha and her parents, stayed. Uncle Christopher apologized to me directly, admitting he should have questioned the story. As my parents gathered Ethan to leave, Mom turned to me one last time. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. No, I said steadily. You destroyed it the day you decided I was expendable. I just refused to disappear quietly. They left, taking my baby brother with them. My heart broke for Ethan, but Grandma squeezed my hand. The trust is ironclad, she whispered. They can't touch his money, and Kara will make sure he knows the truth when he's older. You haven't lost him forever. The party continued without them. Smaller, quieter, but genuine. Family members approached me throughout the afternoon, apologizing for believing the lies, sharing their own memories of Mark, welcoming me back. As we drove home that night, Aunt Kara reached over and squeezed my hand. You did good today. Mark would be proud. I thought about my brother, about the card in my pocket, about the truth finally being in the open. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I still had therapy, still had nightmares, still had to figure out how to build a life without parents. But I had Grandma, I had Aunt Kara, I had truth on my side. And somehow, that felt like enough to start with. The weeks following the party confrontation brought a strange mix of relief and chaos. My phone became a battlefield of messages from extended family members trying to piece together what really happened. Some relatives who'd left with my parents started reaching back out, asking questions they should have asked years ago. Aunt Kara set up a small desk in my room where I could organize all the documentation Grandma had given me copies of. Bank statements, emails, screenshots of social media posts where my parents had been crafting their narrative for years. The evidence painted a picture so clear it made my chest tight. They hadn't just decided to abandon me after Mark died. They'd been methodically planning my removal from the family while keeping up appearances as grieving parents and mental health professionals. Work at the bookstore became my escape. My boss, Mrs. Chen, had been nothing but supportive since learning about my situation. She adjusted my schedule around my therapy appointments and even let me study for my GED during slow periods. The familiar smell of books and coffee grounded me when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. 3 days after the party, cousin Samantha showed up at the bookstore during my shift. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes matching my own. We sat in the back room during my break while she explained what had been happening on my parents' side of the family divide. They're doubling down, she said, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea. Your mom called my mom crying about how you've turned everyone against them. Said you manipulated grandma into changing her will. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Right, because a 17-year-old has that kind of power over grandma. That's what I said. But they're telling everyone who will listen that you've been planning this since Mark died. That you wanted his share of everything. Samantha's voice dropped. They're saying you were jealous of him. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Jealous? Of course I'd been jealous sometimes. Mark was perfect. I was the weird one. But I'd loved my brother more than anything. He'd been my protector, my best friend, the one person who never made me feel like I wasn't enough. They're also saying Aunt Kara coached you, Samantha continued, that she's always resented your dad for being the favorite child and is using you to get revenge. I thought about Aunt Kara, who'd taken me in without question, who'd turned her life upside down to give me a home. The idea that she was using me for some decades-old sibling rivalry was absurd, but I could see how my parents would spin it. They were both so good at making their version of reality sound reasonable. That evening, Aunt Kara and I had dinner with Claire, her social worker friend who'd been helping us navigate everything. Claire had news that made my stomach drop. Your parents have been reaching out to family services, she said carefully. They're claiming you're a runaway who's been manipulated by relatives. They want you returned home. But I'm emancipated, I said, my voice shaking. They signed the papers, which is why their claim won't go anywhere, Claire assured me. But it shows they're escalating. They're trying to control the narrative by involving outside authorities. Aunt Kara's jaw was tight. What do we need to do? Claire pulled out a folder. Document everything. Every interaction, every message, every attempt at contact. I've already been in touch with the caseworker assigned to look into their claim. She's interested in why mental health professionals forced their minor child to seek emancipation. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, who spent their careers helping other families heal, had systematically destroyed their own. Dad ran support groups for grieving parents while telling those same parents that his living daughter had called his son. Mom counseled families through trauma while traumatizing her own child. The next few weeks became a careful dance of documentation and distance. My parents' attempts to contact me escalated from phone calls to showing up at places they thought I'd be. They appeared at the bookstore twice, but Mrs. Chen was magnificent, calmly informing them they were trespassing and needed to leave. The second time, she called the police, who escorted them out. They tried the school next, apparently not knowing I'd withdrawn to focus on my GED after the emancipation. The secretary called Aunt Kara, confused about why parents were trying to pull records for a student who was no longer enrolled. Each attempt was documented. Each lie they told was recorded. Claire helped us organize everything into a comprehensive timeline that showed a clear pattern of escalation. The real shock came when Uncle Christopher called Aunt Kara. He'd been at a professional conference and ran into one of Dad's colleagues from the grief support network. The colleague had pulled him aside with concerns. Robert's been telling us about his daughter for months, the colleague had said. The story keeps changing. First she was troubled but getting help. Then she was refusing help. Then she was spreading lies about the accident. Now apparently she's been kidnapped by family members. We're concerned. Even Dad's professional community was starting to notice the inconsistencies. Uncle Christopher had given the colleague Grandma's number, suggesting he might want to hear another perspective. Grandma, meanwhile, had become a force of nature. She'd spent decades being the quiet matriarch, hosting holidays and sending birthday cards. Now she was done being silent. She reached out to every family member with the truth, armed with documentation and a grandmother's fury. The family divide deepened, but it wasn't as clean as my parents had hoped. People who'd initially sided with them started asking questions. Why hadn't they mentioned I was emancipated? Why were the stories about the accident night different each time? Why had they hidden Mark's birthday card for 3 years? My therapy sessions became intense as we worked through not just the grief of losing Mark, but the trauma of being systematically erased by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my parents' grief had twisted into something toxic, and I'd become the repository for all their pain and guilt. They need someone to blame, she explained during one session. The randomness of losing a child is unbearable for some people. If they can blame you, then there's a reason, a cause, something that makes sense in their pain. But I was sick, I said for the 100th time. I had the flu. There's proof. Facts don't matter when people are running from their pain, Dr. Martinez said gently. Your parents are mental health professionals who can't face their own mental health. The cognitive dissonance must be excruciating. I thought about that a lot. My parents, who knew all the right words about grief and healing, who'd written a book about moving forward, couldn't actually do any of it. They were stuck in a loop of blame and denial, and they'd rather lose their living daughter than face the reality that sometimes terrible things just happen. The situation exploded again when Grandma received a cease and desist letter from my parents' lawyer. They claimed she was defaming them by spreading malicious lies about their treatment of me. The letter demanded she stop contacting family members and retract her statements about the will changes. Grandma's response was to hire her own lawyer and counter with evidence of defamation against me. The emails where Dad claimed I'd caused Mark's death. The social media posts painting me as troubled and manipulative. The documented lies about the night of the accident. They want to play legal games? Grandma said over dinner at her house. Fine. I've been documenting their behavior for 3 years. Let's see how they like having their own methods used against them. The lawyer Grandma hired was thorough. He sent a response that not only refused their demands, but outlined potential consequences if they continued spreading false information about me. He included screenshots of Dad's posts to the grief support group, highlighting the changing narrative and false claims about my involvement in Mark's accident. My parents' response was to escalate further. They started a blog about parental alienation, claiming I'd been turned against them by manipulative relatives. They never used my name, referring to me only as our surviving child, but anyone who knew the situation could connect the dots. The blog posts were painful to read. They painted themselves as victims, grieving parents who'd lost both children, one to death, one to family manipulation. They wrote about the pain of having their daughter refuse to come home, of being shut out of her life, of watching her be poisoned against them. Every post was a masterclass in rewriting history. The emancipation they'd forced became me abandoning them. The photos they'd thrown away became too painful to display. The birthday card they'd hidden became something they'd been waiting for the right time to share. Claire helped us document every blog post, noting the lies and contradictions. The IP address tracked back to Dad's office computer, which meant he was writing fictional narratives about our family while supposedly helping other families heal from their trauma. The breaking point came when they published a post about the night Mark died. In their version, I'd been difficult that evening, refusing to go with Mark, making excuses. They implied, without stating directly, that my selfishness had sent him to his death alone. I threw up after reading it. Aunt Kara found me on the bathroom floor, shaking and sobbing. The guilt I'd carried for 3 years, survivor's guilt, my therapist called it, came flooding back. Even knowing it was lies, even with all the proof that I'd been sick, their words burrowed under my skin. They're trying to break you, Aunt Kara said, holding me while I cried. They want you to come crawling back, to admit to their version of events, to play the troubled child they've cast you as. But I wasn't that child. I was the girl who'd survived losing her brother and being abandoned by her parents. I was the one working full-time while getting her GED. I was the one in therapy, actually doing the work of healing while they hid behind their professional facades. Grandma called an emergency family meeting. Not everyone came, but enough did. She laid out everything. The blog posts, the legal threats, the escalating lies. She showed them the documentation, the timeline Claire had helped create, the clear pattern of manipulation and abandonment. I need you all to understand, Grandma said, her voice steady but fierce. This isn't about taking sides in a family dispute. This is about protecting a child who's been systematically abused by the people who should have protected her. Uncle Christopher had done his own investigation after the conference encounter. He'd reached out to Mark's friends from high school, the ones who'd been at the party that night. Every single one confirmed that I was supposed to go but had been too sick. One even had old text messages from Mark that night, joking about being the only sober one there since his designated driver little sister was home with the plague. The evidence was overwhelming, but my parents had built their new reality so carefully that admitting the truth would mean admitting to 3 years of deliberate cruelty. Instead, they dug in deeper. They started showing up at family events they knew I'd attend, forcing confrontations. At Cousin Fair's graduation party, Mom cornered me in the bathroom, tears streaming down her face as she begged me to come home. We can fix this, she said, gripping my hands. Just tell everyone you were confused, that you misunderstood. We'll go to family therapy, we'll work through it. With you as the therapist? I asked, pulling away. Mom, you need help, real help, not the performance you do for everyone else. Her face changed instantly, the tears drying up. You always were jealous of him, she hissed. Maybe you didn't convince him to go alone, but you were glad when he died. It meant you could finally be the only child. The accusation was so cruel, so calculated to hurt, that I almost laughed. This was who my mother really was under the therapist facade, someone who would wound her own child to avoid facing her pain. I left the bathroom and found Aunt Kara immediately. We left the party, but not before several family members saw Mom follow me out, still performing her grieving mother act for the audience. The blog posts intensified after that. Dad wrote about false memory syndrome, implying I'd been convinced to remember things that hadn't happened. He discussed how grief could make children vulnerable to manipulation, how well-meaning relatives could accidentally create false narratives. It was brilliant in its cruelty. By using clinical language and psychological concepts, he made their version sound reasonable, professional, researched. People who didn't know the full story might even find it convincing, but we had something more powerful than their carefully crafted narrative. We had the truth, documented and verified. We had family members who'd witnessed their behavior. We had 3 years of evidence showing a pattern of abandonment and emotional abuse. The war of narratives continued to escalate. My parents gave interviews to a grief support podcast, carefully dancing around specifics but painting a picture of parents destroyed by family interference. They started a support group for parents experiencing alienation, using their professional credentials to lend legitimacy to their lies. Each move was met with documentation. Claire connected us with a family law attorney who specialized in defamation cases. The blog posts, podcast appearances, and support group presentations were all being cataloged as evidence of an ongoing campaign to damage my reputation and mental health. The extended family was exhausted by the drama. Some relatives withdrew entirely, not wanting to deal with the conflict. Others picked sides based on who they'd rather believe, not necessarily who was telling the truth. The family that had gathered for every holiday, every birthday, every milestone was fracturing along lines that might never heal. But through it all, I had my core support system. Grandma, whose love was fierce and protective. Aunt Kara, who'd upended her life to give me a home. Claire, who donated her professional expertise to keep me safe. My therapist, who helped me process the ongoing trauma. Mrs. Chen, who made sure I had stable employment and a safe space. The irony was that my parents' campaign to paint me as troubled and manipulated only highlighted how many people were willing to support and protect me. Every lie they told was met with truth from someone who'd witnessed their behavior. Every attempt to isolate me only strengthened the bonds with those who saw through their facade. As summer turned to fall, the situation reached a strange equilibrium. My parents continued their public performance of grieving, alienated parents. I continued building my life, working toward my GED, saving money for community college, going to therapy, healing in ways they couldn't or wouldn't. The trust Grandma had set up for Ethan and me was ironclad, protected by legal documentation that would ensure my baby brother would have resources when he was older, regardless of what stories our parents told him. I held on to hope that someday, when he was old enough to ask questions, the truth would still be there, documented and undeniable. But the cost of truth was high. Family gatherings were split, with careful scheduling to keep my parents and me apart. Relationships that had lasted decades were strained or broken. The family photo albums that once showed a united extended family now had visible gaps, missing faces, empty spaces where connection used to be. Still, I wouldn't change my decision to refuse their narrative. The alternative, accepting blame for Mark's death, allowing them to erase me, pretending their abandonment was my choice, would have destroyed me in ways that no family conflict could match. As I prepared for what would have been Mark's 21st birthday, I pulled out his card again. To my favorite person in the world. Can't wait to watch you grow up. He'd never get to see who I became, but I was determined to become someone he'd be proud of. Not the troubled child my parents painted me as, but a survivor who refused to let their pain define my truth. The battle wasn't over. My parents showed no signs of accepting reality, and their campaign to rewrite history continued. But I had something they didn't, the ability to face the truth, no matter how painful. And with each passing day, each therapy session, each moment of genuine connection with those who truly loved me, I grew stronger. The girl who'd found those garbage bags full of photos in the garage was gone. In her place stood someone harder, sadder, but ultimately unbreakable. My parents had tried to erase me, but instead they'd forged me into someone who would never again accept being made invisible. The war for the family narrative would continue, but I was no longer fighting alone. Truth had its own power, and time had a way of revealing what people tried to hide. Someday, the full story would be known. Until then, I would keep building my life, one documented truth at a time. The morning after Mark's 26th birthday. I woke up to find Aunt Kara already on the phone with someone. Her voice carried through the thin walls of her apartment, tense and clipped. When she hung up, she found me in the kitchen pouring cereal. That was your Uncle Christopher, she said, rubbing her temples. Your parents showed up at his house at 6 a.m., demanding he convince Grandma to reverse the will changes. My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. They were getting desperate. He recorded the whole thing, Aunt Kara continued. Your dad threatened to expose some business deal from 20 years ago if Christopher didn't help him. Your mom just stood there crying about how everyone's turned against them. The doorbell rang before I could respond. We both froze. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in business attire holding a clipboard. Process server, she announced when Aunt Kara opened the door. She handed over an envelope. You've been served. My stomach dropped as Aunt Kara read through the papers. They're contesting Grandma's mental capacity, she said, her voice flat, claiming she's been manipulated due to age-related cognitive decline. The papers shook in her hands. My parents were trying to invalidate the will changes by attacking Grandma's mental state. The same Grandma who'd methodically documented their behavior for 3 years. Within an hour, we were at Grandma's house with Claire and the family lawyer. Grandma sat at her dining table, reading through the legal filing with steel in her eyes. They want to play dirty? She said calmly. Then let's show them what prepared looks like. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, spread out documents across the table. I anticipated this move. Your grandmother underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation 6 months ago when she first consulted me about the will changes. Perfect scores across the board. Grandma pulled out another folder. I also had 2 witnesses present for every legal document signing. Both are willing to testify to my mental clarity. Claire added her own documentation. I've been keeping professional notes on all interactions. Your parents' pattern of behavior actually strengthens the case for why the will changes were necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. Emergency. Check your mom's Facebook. The post made my blood run cold. Mom had shared a photo of Mark and me from years ago with a long caption about losing both her children. One to death, one to family manipulation. But it was the comments that made me sick. She was responding to condolences by sharing intimate details about my supposed mental health struggles, painting me as unstable and dangerous. She's violating HIPAA, Claire said, reading over my shoulder. As a licensed therapist, she can't share false mental health information about you publicly, even if you're her daughter. Mr. Harrison immediately began documenting the posts. This is defamation and professional misconduct. We need to report this to the licensing board. The next few days became a whirlwind of legal preparation. My parents' attempt to challenge Grandma's mental capacity had backfired spectacularly. Not only did we have proof of her cognitive health, but their filing revealed their desperation to anyone paying attention. Uncle Christopher visited with a flash drive. I've been recording every interaction with them since the party, he admitted. I felt guilty at first, but after what they tried to pull at my house, I'm done protecting them. The recordings were damning. Dad admitting they needed the inheritance to cover debts from failed investments. Mom discussing how they could spin the narrative to make me look unstable. Both of them strategizing about how to isolate me from family support. Cousin Fair's mom, Aunt Linda, called with her own revelation. I just got off the phone with 3 other parents from the grief support group your dad runs. They're all comparing notes. The stories he tells about you change depending on his audience. The house of cards was collapsing. Dad's grief support group members started reaching out to each other, discovering inconsistencies in his narratives. Mom's therapy practice received inquiries about her social media posts. Their carefully maintained professional facades were cracking. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Grandma's lawyer had requested a settlement conference, hoping to avoid a prolonged legal battle. My parents arrived with their attorney, looking haggard. Mom's usually perfect appearance was disheveled. Dad's confident demeanor had crumbled into something desperate. The conference room at Mr. Harrison's office felt suffocating. I sat between Grandma and Aunt Kara, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Across the table, my parents wouldn't look at me. Their lawyer opened with an offer. My clients are willing to drop the competency challenge if Mrs. Patterson agrees to restore them to the will. Grandma's laugh was sharp. Counter offer. They drop everything, stop all defamation, and agree to a no-contact order with Lily, and I won't pursue professional misconduct charges that would end both their careers. Mom's gasp was audible. Dad's face went gray. Mr. Harrison slid a folder across the table. The evidence of professional misconduct is comprehensive. Social media posts violating patient privacy ethics, recorded admissions of filing false reports, documentation of emotional abuse of a minor while serving as mental health professionals. You're bluffing, Dad said, but his voice wavered. Page 12, Mr. Harrison said calmly. Screenshot of you telling your grief support group that Lily caused Mark's death. Page 18, your wife's Facebook post claiming Lily has conditions she's never been diagnosed with. Page 24, the recording where you admit to lying about the night of the accident. The room went silent except for the sound of pages turning. Their lawyer's expression grew increasingly grim as he read. We need a moment with our clients, he finally said. We waited in the lobby while they conferred. Aunt Kara held my hand. Grandma sat perfectly straight, the picture of dignity. Claire typed notes on her phone, documenting everything. 20 minutes later, we were called back in. Mom was crying silently. Dad stared at the table. My clients agree to all terms, their lawyer said quietly. No contact with Lily, no further defamation. They'll sign whatever necessary to ensure the trust remains intact. And the blog? Mr. Harrison asked. Deleted within 24 hours, the lawyer confirmed. All posts, all references. The paperwork took another hour. Restraining orders, cease and desist agreements, affidavits acknowledging the trust's validity. Each signature felt like another wall being built between us, but these walls were protection, not prison. As we prepared to leave, Mom suddenly spoke. I need to say something. Everyone tensed. Their lawyer started to object, but she waved him off. I know you won't believe me, she said, looking at me for the first time in months, but I loved Mark, and I loved you. I broke when he died, and instead of facing that break, I let it poison everything. Dad remained silent, his jaw clenched. That doesn't excuse anything, Mom continued, tears streaming. I became someone monstrous. I see that now. The things we did, the lies we told, there's no justification. Then why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you throw our pictures away? Why did you hide his card? Why did you try to erase me? Mom's sob was broken. Because you lived. And every time I saw you, I saw him. And every time I saw him in you, I had to face that he was gone. It was easier to pretend you were the problem than to admit I was drowning. That's enough, their lawyer interrupted. We should go. They left without another word. Dad never even looked at me. The aftermath was swift. Within days, the blog vanished. The social media posts disappeared. The grief support group apparently asked Dad to take a leave of absence after multiple members raised concerns. Mom Mom's therapy practice went on hiatus. Extended family members who'd been on the fence started reaching out with apologies. The evidence presented in the legal proceedings had spread through the family grapevine. Uncle Christopher became our fiercest advocate, sharing the recordings with anyone who still doubted. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected package. No return address, but I recognized Dad's handwriting. Inside was a small box containing Mark's class ring and a USB drive. The drive had hundreds of photos. Mark and me through the years. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, random Tuesday afternoons, all the images they'd thrown away. But Dad had apparently kept digital copies. No note, no explanation, just the photos. I spent hours going through them with Aunt Kara and Grandma, laughing at Mark's ridiculous faces, crying at the candid moments I'd forgotten. It felt like getting a piece of him back. The trust paperwork was finalized a month later. Grandma, Aunt Kara, and Mr. Harrison had structured it brilliantly. My portion would cover college and living expenses, with additional funds becoming available at 25. Ethan's portion was even more protected, accessible only for education and healthcare until he turned 18, then managed releases after that. He'll be okay, Grandma assured me as we signed the final papers. When he's old enough to ask questions, we'll have answers. The truth will be waiting for him. The restraining orders meant I couldn't see my baby brother, but Grandma had thought of that too. She'd established a separate fund for family therapy when Ethan turned 16, if he chose to pursue a relationship with me then. Mrs. Chen offered me a promotion to assistant manager at the bookstore. The extra income meant I could cut back hours once I started community college. My GED scores had come back strong enough for several scholarship opportunities. Dr. Martinez helped me process the strange grief of losing parents who were still alive. Sometimes, she said during one session, the healthiest thing is accepting that some relationships can't be repaired. Your job isn't to fix them. It's to build a life where their absence doesn't define you.